All right, so today's topic is about the first blockchain, and we're going to go into what the problem was that the first blockchain was solving, and then what it looked like. And we're going to let Stuart Haber explain himself what the problem was.
But a digital document could also be a lab notebook entry, patent application, legal contract. Even that photo of your cat is a digital document that can be modified or changed easily, as you all know. Back in 1989, it was clear that all of the world's records were moving online. They hadn't quite gotten there yet, but that's where things were going. And Stornetta and I were deeply worried about the integrity and authenticity of the world's records. Cryptographical tools that were available at the time pointed to a straightforward solution to the problem. Rely on a single central trusted entity for the integrity of records, at least within a certain domain or area. This corresponds in the real world to relying on City Hall for your marriage license, the DMV for your driver's license, your bank for the balance of your checking account. But relying on a single trusted entity is what security people call a single point of failure, one that can be bribed, corrupted, hacked. We wondered if we could do better.
Alrighty. So the it's this item here that was most likely his key point is that there was a single centralized entity that was front and center of all the solutions when it came to ensuring the integrity of all of our data. And before he gave this speech, he also had published a white paper on this topic, and this is his description of the problem, and this is my attempt to paraphrase. But they're basically saying the same thing. Is the takeaway or the idea was to take away the ability completely for anybody to be able to alter or change past data, even if they have or even if they want to. The ability would not exist. Take that ability away completely. And this statement is also easy to misconstrue. I mean, it's important, but it's easy to misconstrue. And let's look back to our example from our first hash function, which the key was taken out of DES. It was still a random process. You could take a sensitive or secret document and create a 64-bit hash value that you could not reverse engineer, and the banks would do this. But what Haber is pointing out is, even with this process, banks still have the original data. They still have the ability to go in for whatever reason or whatever motivation. This ability exists, and they have the ability to change that data. So there's an important distinction here. Uh, the problem he's talking about is not so much focused on, we trust banks not to change our data, although that these are related. We go to a great banks. We like banks with great reputations and so on. But really, his point is, and the main point is, that this ability should not even exist. Let's just remove that completely. And this topic and this idea is also on the first page of the Bitcoin white paper. It shows up 4 times. And Stuart Haber is also, of the 9 references in the Bitcoin white paper, Stuart Haber is 3 of them. And all the statements here are referring to some third party that's centralized, that has the ability to influence commerce and person-to-person transactions. So the problem was to build a solution so that that a central entity does not have the ability to falsify a document even if it wanted to. Remove that ability. And Haber talked about banks in his speech and even in his publications, but those actually weren't his customers. Banks in the United States largely still could rely on trust, and it wasn't so much of an issue for them. But an example of who did need this were companies seeking patent protection on things they were working on, so proprietary information that needed protection. So specifically, they had to prove that they had this data, and also that they had created this data at a certain point. And especially if there was a competing patent, you have two different people, two different inventors claiming the same idea. You had to prove that you did not, falsify a document. You did not go back and backdate or add things to it and so on. That you had to prove that this is the original unaltered data produced by you at a certain point. Otherwise, when you go in front of a judge, you have two competing companies. Each has the ability and the motivation to try to go back and forge some data to win the patent. So it's just impossible to tell. So linked timestamping, this is what the first blockchain was called. This was the good product market fit for this problem. And it was Scott Stornetta, Stuart Haber. They worked together. It was over many years they spent building and refining this. But their blockchain started January 4th in 1991. And here's how it worked. So you'd have a company who was, this company is seeking a patent. They want to keep track of all their records. So they would keep all these documents. Then they would take each document and they would run them through the SHA-256 hash function, and they would get a 256-bit hash value, call it hash A1, A2, and A3. Just condensing the slide here. And they'd give these results to Haber's company, which was Surety LLC. So we'll walk through how it works. We have the customer here, the company, customer here, and then the company Surety. And Surety would receive these documents from the customer. They would group them together in what came to be called blocks of data. And then all this data would essentially be concatenated, or the whole group would be run through its own hash function. So you'd run all this through a hash, and you would get out a hash of the entire block, and we call it the block one hash, or just the block hash. And then this would be widely published in the New York Times. And here's Haber, the pictures of the first hash value, I believe, from the New York Times, published every Sunday. So it's 2 points here. One, this public dissemination is one of the two sources of how this ensures data integrity. So once this hash value becomes widely disseminated, at this point, no one can go back. No one has the ability to go back and change this data. So on the one hand, it's easy for you to verify that you're looking at the hash value. If your job is to prove the data has not been altered and you're given this hash value, it's easy to verify that this hash has not been changed, because there's New York Times and libraries, schools, and microfilm. It's on digits. It's spread all over the world. You can go to as many different locations as you would like and look at this value, and that newspaper should correlate or should match the value you were given. Or you want to say it another way, if you're a bad actor and you wanted to maliciously alter this value or change some document in here which would change this value, you'd have to go to countless of thousands of New York Times spread all over the world and change this hash value here, which is impossible to do. And we know this from the one-way features of hash functions, that this value can only be produced by this data here, and this data here can only be produced by the original documents from the company. And then number two, it's the linking of these blocks of data over time that ensure the timing has not been altered. So block two here, this includes the hash from block one. So we have all of our documents from block one. They're grouped together, run through their own hash. So you get a hash of all block one data. And now it becomes part of block two data. So in block two, we take our block one hash, we take all of our new data in block two, run it through the hash function, hash algorithm, and we get the block two hash. So that means, in terms of timing, these documents, this data entered into this construct, this protection scheme, only after the block one was hashed and published. The timing of that is guaranteed. And the blocks will include admin data to include date and time, but this is really more for surety internally to help themselves to stay organized. It's this cryptographic hash tool here, and it's the linkage This is what provides the proof of its location on the blockchain. Time is being measured by block, not by, the clock on the wall we would normally think about. So at this point, now you have no ability at all to change the data or change the timing of the data. So if company company A or surety or anyone else tried to go back and change any one of these documents, it would change this hash value. And it would be easy to detect, and people would know it was fraudulent. So there's no ability at all to change the original data or change the timing of when the data entered the blockchain. So let's look one more time at each one of these 2 points, changing the original data and the timing. So the first one, the integrity and authenticity of data on this chain. So we're gonna pull in a website here. So this is from Anders Brownsworth. I'm gonna scoot this up. And I went in and I pre-filled all this data, and we're gonna start. It starts with block 1, goes all the way to block 5, and we're just gonna go here block 4. And there's a term here called nonce. We'll cover that later. For now, just know that this is a number that your computer iterates through to yield a predetermined number of leading zeros in the hash result. In this case, it's 4 leading zeros, but more on this nonce later. For now, just know that you can see these hash results are linked. So here's the block 3 hash result. Starts with the 5F7, and you can see that it's now included in the block 4 data. So in block 4, you've got the nonce, you've got this data, and you've got this previous hash. All these grouped together create this hash for block 4. And then that's the 8B7. So you can see the same thing here in block 5. It includes the hash of block 4, got its own nonce, and then it's got its own data. All this grouped together now creates this hash. They're all linked together. So the result of this is if you try to go in and change this data, so change this from a 12 to let's say 19, it's going to change this hash value, which is now going to show up as this changed hash value, which also breaks this hash value. So this unauthorized or malicious trying to alter or change data in the past is easily detectable. So if you see a linkage of blocks that still had the proper linkage of the hash values, you know that all this prior data has not been changed, and the timing of when this data entered into the blockchain has not been changed. And there's also a bunch of other stuff on that website too you can check out for just some useful overviews. And then so next, the time the data was created and added to the chain. So once a week, the surety company published the block hash and the hash of all these values in each block, and as we just saw, you cannot break the chain without detection. And if you file for a patent on this day, or if you have information that you'll eventually file for a patent, and the hash of this patent information goes into this block, and these blocks are all linked together, the judge knows for certain that the date of this information and the information itself has not been tampered with. It is the data and the timing are 100% guaranteed. And then one last example. Let's go into a problem we run into when you have a very large project. So a very large project will have a whole host of different companies coming together for one business venture. They're going to work together. They're on some kind of timeline. It could be months. It could be years. They're on a long timeline. And in these projects, there is a mountain of administrative paperwork. All the paperwork is intertwined, linked together. They're due at certain points. It can be very confusing. These are all the types of documents you can expect to see, and the purpose of them is just to trace back important aspects of each different company's contributions, what their obligations are, what they're supposed to do, and especially if there's an issue found with cost, budget, or performance, or some problem found, Who pays for that mistake? Who is financially on the hook to pay for this problem? So here's what this looks like. So invariably on these large projects, they're going to run into some kind of issue. Here it happens on this point in the timeline. And now you've got all these companies that have strong incentives to go back, and they have an incentive to change the data on these documents. This is information that has already been recorded. So each company, we're trusting them not to, but now they've got the motivation to, and they have the ability to change this data, and on occasion they have the incentives to change it. And then the trust amongst all these different parties who might not know each other, that trust only goes so far. And this translates to a lot of wasted money for each individual company, because essentially now they're looking where they're just trying to protect themselves from the others and not get wrongfully blamed. So they're wasting money, essentially, being very skeptical, not working together as thoroughly as they could or as well as they could, and wasting a lot of money to make sure that they're not financially penalized. So as you can probably guess, the ideal solution would remove this ability for all the companies to change data. And this is exactly what the surety blockchain does. So every document from all these different companies are submitted to surety at a certain time. The documents are bundled together, put in a block. The block hash occurs. It's widely distributed, and then it's linked to the next block. And as a result, companies no longer have the ability to change data. And very ironically, this actually by this increases the transparency, and then this also increases the overall trust in the project. So ironically, trust also increases. So the problem that Stuart Habert that he talked about is it's not so much about that we need to trust. Rather, it's that the fact that we have to trust in the first place. We need to get rid of this ability for anyone to change this data. So his solution, the surety blockchain, which is still published every day, or not every day, every Sunday, you can still find this in the New York Times. His solution solves this problem. And then once data goes into this chain, not even surety, I mean, no one can change this data once it enters the blockchain, and the timing of it is guaranteed.